the way we can honor the people we love and who loved us the most is to be the people who they loved into being.
Mm-hmm.
If I ruined my life because I lost my mom, would that be an honor or a dishonor to my mother?
Joining us now, she's an author, advice columnist, lecturer, essayist, wise woman with 2 capital W's, and the host of the new iHeart Women's Sports podcast, Mind Over Mountain. She's written 4 books, the novel Torch, and nonfiction works Tiny Beautiful Things, Brave Enough, and Wild, From Lost to Found on the Pacific Crest Trail, which was an international bestseller, later adapted into the 2014 Academy Award-nominated film Wild, starring Reese Witherspoon. Tiny Beautiful Things inspired a play starring Nina Vardolis, a TV show starring Katherine Hahn, 2 different podcasts for the New York Times, and is a go-to source for advice given by yours truly using copy-pasted quotes and screen grabs texted to friends. There is a 10-foot bronze statue of her in New York State. It's Cheryl Strayed. Hi, Cheryl.
Oh my gosh. Okay. The only thing I'm going to quibble with is wise woman in capital letters. Can we put them lowercase?
Yes.
I mean, I'm a
No.
writer.
I'm so sorry.
We have to writing is revision. So
No, I'm so sorry. You will forever be a wise woman. And you continue to prove it daily. So until we remove that title for you, which, as it turns out, some very popular people have had their titles removed in the last few years when they revealed themselves to be dumbasses and assholes. So that might happen, but for now, I'm so sorry. You will have to have two capital W's in your name.
I want to note the dispute, but I'll try to live up to it just for this episode of this podcast.
There we go.
Sarah, I'm so thrilled to be with you because, you are just a hero to me and such a delight. And you have forged a path
so nice
for so many of us in this area of women's sports and in general. So thank you for inviting me to be on your show.
That's really nice. Well, this is going to be a mutual admiration society then, because I'm so excited to have you on the show. I'm so excited to invite you to the iHeart Women's Sports family. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
I want to hear about Mind Over Mountain. A couple episodes in, tell me about the stories that you want to highlight with this show.
Yeah. Well, the reason that I wanted to do this is that all my life I have been informed and transformed and changed and inspired and emboldened and empowered by women doing hard things with their bodies. And, obviously in my book, Wild, when I wrote about my hike on the Pacific Crest Trail, it's very much a story about a physically challenging thing. It's also a story about an emotionally challenging thing, about grief and the inner struggle that happens when you do something difficult, like carry a heavy pack or walk a trail. And I think that I could do that. Because I had seen so many women athletes of all varieties modeling that kind of endurance and persistence. And so I really wanted to kind of bring those 2 things together in Mind Over Mountain, this new podcast, where I do have conversations with women athletes about their sport and about the hard things they do physically and how they train and what it's like to step up to that bar or run that race or swim that mile or 500 miles or whatever it is. But then I also want to know the inner journeys they've been on to get there, the barriers they've faced in both sport and life. And because I don't think those things are separate. I have a kind of ancient perspective, I think, of athleticism and sport. And it is always both an interior and an exterior struggle.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to listen because I think particularly if you end up talking to a lot of those who pursue individual feats, whether that's marathon running or distance running, whether that's mountain climbing, whether, it's weightlifting like your first guest. There is something very particular to those things that I feel like is internal in a different way than people who thrive in something like a team sport of basketball. When I talk to my friend who does the ultra marathons, I'm like, there's something in there that you're trying to get to when you're out there. She just did a 100-mile race or something and ran the first 80 miles without even headphones or music or talking to anyone.
Right.
I'm like, something's going on in there that you're shaking out of you when you do that. So I trust you to be the person who dives in and finds out some of that stuff. You're also going to do a little bit of Dear Sugar, inviting guests to help you answer a letter. We'll get to Dear Sugar later because I'm such a huge fan. But I want to ask, in your life, what your relationship to sports has been. Were you ever an athlete or were you always sort of admiring from afar?
I was always an athlete. And yet I was always an athlete in that way that I think doesn't get a lot of kind of external credit. I was never, a competitive athlete who could say like, I won the regionals, and then I went to state and then I, went on scholarship to college. Like you have that kind of past. And But I think like so many of us, and this is also something I really want to speak to on Mind Over Mountain, because I do think that obviously, there are the champions among us and I want them on the show. And I'm fascinated by those people who are working at that top level. But I think what most of us relate to is, those struggles that we have. I was a runner in high school. I was on the track and cross country team. And I would say that it is the one thing in my teen years that actually sort of saved me. It was probably the only
Mm,
way, the only arena in which I felt I was truly expressing the truth of who I was inside. Um,
mm.
I, like a lot of teenagers, I was obsessed with being loved and accepted. And for me and my generation, I mean, let's face it, probably for all the generations of girls and women, that meant, being like, affirmed, like being considered pretty or skinny or all of those things that I, all through my teen years, really um, flirted with an eating disorder. I wouldn't say I had an eating disorder. I had a dysfunctional eating because I was,
Mhm.
I wanted to be pretty. And with running, I think it really saved me from it because I wanted to be a good long distance runner and I needed to feed myself. And that was really
Yeah.
a time when I think I kind of turned a corner psychologically, where I was like, okay, what is more important to me, being strong or having the body that whatever ridiculous society, the society we live in,
Yeah.
the patriarchy says I need to have.
Mhm.
And then all through
Yeah.
my life, in my adult life, I've continued to run and of course hike, very central part of my life. And I also have been a weightlifter off and on, but the last couple of years in a more serious way, a more dedicated way. And so, yeah, I've
Cool.
always been doing something, Sarah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too that I think there's certain advice that we hear throughout life and it becomes almost so regular and vague-ish that we don't listen to it. And one of them is the actual health benefits of moving your body in a way that isn't about losing weight or even cardiovascular. It's literally allowing your systems to reset, your
Yeah.
stress regulation, your course, like all those things. And you went through a lot we're going to get to later in your life. And I imagine maybe you aren't even fully aware of how much healing it was doing to move your body and to run. It was resetting you every time
Yeah.
you went out to move from whatever was going on back home or whatever you were struggling with. And I wish we could do a better job of telling young people about that benefit. I think we sometimes hear exercise is good for you.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, keep it moving. But there's so much to it. I'm obsessed with The Body Keeps the Score. I think if everybody read it, it would just change the world.
Yeah.
There's so much in there about that.
Well, and I want to say this. I mean, I think that exercise, really needs a rebranding because I feel like we completely have misunderstood what exercise is. For one thing, it's so tied, it's so linked to weight loss. And if you just go do like a minute of research about this, what you will find is exercise is actually not a significant driver of weight loss. I hate to break it to you
Nope.
folks. It's not.
Sadly.
It's
No.
it's it's an important factor of a healthy life and it's an important factor in, metabolic health, don't get me wrong. And it's incredibly important for our mental health as well. Exercise is like the magic pill. If it could be prescribed as a pill, every doctor would have all of us on it.
Yeah.
But we have tied it so much to this ridiculous weight loss bullshit. Am I allowed to say that bullshit on your show?
Yeah, for sure.
That it's just, I think that it's really been sort of misunderstood in a profound way. And you're right. When I was a teenager, I didn't know how much running was good for me. And just
Yeah.
psychologically, we know now that it decreases, it's a great medication for depression and anxiety and anything that
Yeah.
ails you.
Yeah. That's so true. I mean, I wonder if you considered yourself an athlete when you first embarked on the hike that inspired Wild. You were by yourself over 1,000 miles on this
Yeah.
trail. Did you think like, well, I'm an athlete, I can do this? Or was it so necessary to go somewhere that you didn't even really think about whether you were capable?
I definitely did not meet the profile of an athlete. I mean, in addition to just basically, being pretty out of shape, at that moment that I set out on the trail, the year or two that preceded that were some of the most difficult years of my life. My mother had died suddenly of cancer, and I had gotten involved with drugs. I mean, the last time I used heroin was a few days before I set out on the Pacific Crest Trail, which is a shocking and unfortunate fact, but it is a fact. And I just knew to trust. I mean, I did trust my body when I decided to hike the trail because I knew I was lost. I knew I was in a dark place. And I knew that the two things that made me feel whole were the wilderness. I'd grown up in the woods of northern Minnesota. I knew that felt like a place that restored me to myself, and engaging with something physical that was hard. And I didn't
Mhm.
know how profound that would be, actually, because to be honest with you, really, the body was kind of like the athleticism of the hike was secondary to me. I was shocked when I went out there by how hard it was because I was like, I can walk, no problemo.
It's just walking.
Yeah. Yeah, no big deal. And then, it's a different thing to be carrying an incredibly heavy pack and to be in the
Mhm.
wilderness in that mountainous terrain. And it was so much harder than I thought it would be. And, I went out there thinking this is going to be an emotional processing journey. This is going to be, I'll be inside my mind, I'll be crying, I'll be, all of that stuff. And in fact, what I forgot about all those feelings, didn't realize that's exactly what I needed. And it was all about the body. It was,
Yeah.
how do I keep going? Because this really hurts and I'm really tired. And I don't think I'm strong enough to take another step or lift this pack.
Mhm.
And I was wrong about that.
It's interesting how, for those who are in their heads, it pulls you to the present of what am I feeling in my body right now and feeling embodied in that moment instead of wherever your mind is trying to take you in the past or
Yeah.
anxiety about the future. You've inspired a lot of people to embark on similar journeys. I don't have proof of a direct line between Cheryl Strayed and Wild to the hikes that have become sort of particularly popular for self-discovery on TikTok, like the Camino de Santiago
Yeah.
Trail in Spain. There's a lot of TikToks. I have a friend who's done a couple of these where people really like want to go because they're told this is a place to have a solitary journey and to move your body while thinking through what you want out of your life. Do you still hear from readers even a dozen plus years later
Yeah.
that have decided to turn themselves into explorers because of you?
Yeah. There is not a day that passes that I
Wow.
don't hear from people all over the world in all these different languages. Wild is in 40 some languages. And it is profound and beautiful. And Sarah, I want to tell you, you use that word explorer, and I want to cast that net really wide because some of the most moving emails and letters I've received and messages are from people who didn't go on some wilderness trail. They said things like, I was always afraid to go for a walk by myself in the town where I live. And
Wow.
because of you, I started doing that. And I first just went for like 15 minutes. And then now every day I walk 5 miles by myself and it has restored me to myself. And I feel so much stronger and braver. And it's because I read your book and I thought you were crazy to go do that by yourself. And I thought if you could do that, I could too. And that is to me the highest honor ever because I think that is, people always are like, what's the message of Wild? I'm like, there's no message. Like I wrote the book and you take the message. But I do think that that's like, I think that's the message for me too, of like what I love about sports. I don't think that I am like, Serena Williams or fill in the blank, all these champions, but
Yeah.
there's the essence of like what they are expressing and the things they do in their athletic endeavors. Like I do see some resonance with the ordinary
Yeah.
people who say like, okay, well, it's really hard for me to run a mile because I'm out of shape, but I'm going to do it. And that is
Yeah.
such a victory. I'm so inspired by that.
Right. I want to talk about a week or so before Wild was named to Oprah's book club. And what did you dream of or imagine for yourself? And how did your life change in the weeks that followed? And I'm particularly interested in this because I talked to a lot of very successful women, and especially in their 50s and 60s and even later, they all say, I should have taken bigger swings. I should have dreamed bigger. I should have thought of myself as being able to do bigger things. It took me longer than it should have because I was limiting myself. And so I try to project that onto younger women.
Mhm.
And I wonder for you what you thought was possible before Oprah gave you a call.
Well, listen, I always took big swings. That is, I was born ambitious. I've been a feminist since I learned the definition of the word when I was like 5. If you asked me when I was 5 what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would answer with an absolutely straight face. I was going to be the first woman president of the United States.
Me too.
Really? I know.
Me too. I said, I don't really want to do it, but
Me
if
too.
it's necessary, like if there hasn't been one, I'll do it. I'll take a bullet for the country.
Sarah, I listen to your podcast, and I know this about you. And, you and I are sisters in that way. I have always been wildly ambitious and also condemned for it, because you're not allowed to be that if you're a girl or a woman. And certainly you weren't in my generation. So as a young writer, I mean, I grew up in poverty. I grew up without, any sort of anyone talking to me about college or being like, you could be great things. Never once had any lessons in my life. All of my youth, the only thing I could join were the sports at my public school. But I was ambitious. I wanted to be a great writer. And all through my 20s, I worked as a waitress. I worked all these different jobs, and I wrote very seriously. And, by the time Wild came out, Wild was my second book, I was actually a successful writer. Now, what successful writer means in America is different than what most people not in the literary world, that doesn't mean I was a famous and rich writer. I was somebody who was known in my literary orbit. I was somebody who had achieved, had been published and published well. And, my dreams what I'm trying to say to you is, by the time Wild came out, my dreams had come true. So Wild comes out.
Wow.
And the first week it's out, now Oprah hasn't called yet. The first week it's out, it's number 7 on the New York Times bestseller list. So
amazing.
Right there, I was like, nothing good ever has to happen to me professionally again. I'm like set, right? I mean, I was just like, really, and I'm not joking. Like, I'm serious. That was like, wow, that is a lot. That is enough. And then about 3 weeks, Wild had been out for 3 weeks. It had fulfilled every dream I'd ever had came true. And then my cell phone rang, and it was Oprah. Now, that was like the book got served like a triple shot of espresso. And then it went to number 1. And, by then already, before the book came out, Reese had optioned it for film. And, just all the good things happened. And maybe I was 43 or 44, right in there. I think that what was really so good for me is that I already had a really solid sense of who I was. I already knew I had taken every big swing, and I took the swings where the swings counted, which wasn't in the, can I please be rich and famous and get everyone to love me and affirm me? It was in the work. It was in the work.
Yeah.
And Wild would be the same book, whether it became an international bestseller or not. And I could be proud of the work I did. And that is the only mark of excellence. And I think that's true in sport or in art or in life.
Yeah. As someone who wrote a book that was not on the New York Times bestseller list yet, I have had to tell myself that it's about the work that I did in the book that came out, and not whether or not everybody and their mom read it yet. You mentioned having gone through poverty and struggles early in life. Honestly, it feels like you have lived many lives.
Yeah.
An outsized amount of pain and heartbreak, an unusually large dose of struggle, going through sexual abuse, drug use, the sudden death of your mom at such a young age. All of these things sort of forged a sort of strength and wisdom. Goes to that WW, capital W, wise woman that I talked about. It was very hard earned though. And you've spun a lot of gold out of the tough things you've been handed. And one of your dear sugar pieces of advice that I've shared a lot was you were writing back to a man whose son was killed by a drunk driver. And you said in part, quote, "The strange and painful truth is that I'm a better person because I lost my mom young." You also said, "Your son was your greatest gift in his life, and he is your greatest gift in his death, too. Receive it. Let your dead boy be your most profound revelation. Create something of him. Make it beautiful." And I wonder if that's sort of always been your approach to dealing with the pain of life, is find a way to make it beautiful so it's not just painful.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is our mission here, because, as you listed off those bad luck things, and there have been plenty of them, and even some that you didn't list. But the whole time what I was thinking is, and oh my goodness, I have had so many unbelievably wonderful and good things happen to me. I have had the great fortune of so much luck and love and opportunity and kindness and generosity. And I think that the greatest thing we can do in terms of evolving ourselves emotionally is to see the whole picture, to see the hard things and the suffering and embrace them to the extent that we can bear to embrace them, and to never forget how lucky we are in so many ways too. And that life, life is beauty, and life is suffering, and life is love, and life is loss. And we all get that. And some people get more of one or the other over the long haul, but most of us get a bit of both. And the decisions we make about how to handle both of those things, basically define us. And,
Yep.
I really think about, especially with grief, and what I was saying to that man who lost his son is, I think that the highest honor we can, the way we can honor the people we love and who loved us the most, is to be the people who they loved into being.
Mm-hmm.
If I ruined my life because I lost my mom, would that be an honor or a dishonor to my mother? And,
Mm-hmm.
I have gone about it wildly, ambitiously, and what's crazy to me now, Sarah, is, wild people around the world know my mother's name. They say my mother's name to me. They say Bobby to me, who it's also my daughter's name. And, I can't bring her back, but I can bring her into being through the light of my life and the light of my work.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done that. And I think that in as many ways as we can do that with our losses, we can shine more brightly than we would otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of your wisdom is, I think it's a gift. I think it's very natural for many of us to have a natural gratitude and an attitude about how to be as obsessed with the good things that have happened to us as we are concerned with the bad things.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of your wisdom. My friend Glennon Doyle calls life brutal. It's
Yeah.
brutal and it's beautiful, and you have to figure out how to hold both. I think being wise is sort of a funny thing. You and Glennon fall into the
Yeah.
category of the capital W's. It's sort of something I think you can know about yourself, but others need to tell you that you're wise in order to make it really so. Like, I think it's like being funny. I think it's fine if people say, I'm really good at math or I'm great at history. But as soon as you're like, I'm very funny or I'm very wise, people are sort of like, well, hold on. It's kind of like giving yourself a nickname. Like, that's not allowed.
Yeah.
And I wonder when you knew that you were wise and when the world told you that they agreed.
I think it's interesting because I was, even as a young woman, I was always, people would say, you're mature for your age. And not just like skaggy guys who are trying to date me, which is what they always say about you.
Yeah.
But no, I mean,
it meant you had big tits.
That's
I got
right.
it too. No.
I know. It's like, no, she seems older than she is. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
she looks 19 to me.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
people friends would say that just, in conversations. And I think part of it is the writer in me. The writer's job is to pay attention and to
Mhm.
understand the human condition. And I was always the most curious about our emotional inner lives, the lives that we don't necessarily say out loud or show, the lives, in fact, that we try to conceal. And that has been my lifelong study. And so I think that helps in the wisdom department. But I also want to just say, I agree with you. Like, I can say to you genuinely, like, I do not think I'm wiser than anyone else. I think that I have spent a lot of time cultivating, listening to those deep, dark, truest voices inside myself and in the things I see and perceive in other people. And I am like, when Dear Sugar, I mean, I would say when Dear Sugar it had this cult following online before the book of Tiny Beautiful Things was published. And, people really were starting to come at me like I was some kind of guru. And I was like, absolutely not. There were so many opportunities that I turned down because they tried to establish me as some kind of like higher being, like that I
Right.
would tell people what to do because I was, wiser than them. And I reject that entirely. And the whole magic for me of doing my work as Dear Sugar is, I call it horizontal advice. I am down there with you. You and I, Sarah, if we went on a long walk, which I would love to do someday, we would talk and you would tell me all the up things in your life. And I would tell you all the things in my life. And we would help each other through the wisdom and also the bewilderment of those situations. And that's where I think real power lies in terms of like figuring out like the next step for
Right.
each of us.
Right. And wisdom is like as much about knowing what you don't know as it is about what you do,
Yeah.
because that also informs the most curious approach to giving other people advice and understanding them is what do I not know about what you're going through? And how can that be a part of how I help you through it, as opposed to I know best all the time?
It's about asking questions. It really is. And one thing I always say is sugar is, in my advice, I'm very often not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what you told me you wanted to do, but you're afraid to know that you
Right.
want it. So I'm listening.
Yeah.
It's about listening and asking
Yeah.
questions.
And you're often telling people, ask yourself this.
Yeah.
You're not telling them what the answer is going to be. Just, hey, what happens when you ask yourself this?
Yeah.
And how might that lead you into the answers you're looking for? I'm wondering what the most common thing you're often asked to offer advice about, like a topic that keeps coming back.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question because I mean, honestly, there are only about 6 or 7 questions in the whole universe. We only have a few problems. They could be
Yeah.
they can be put into like buckets. And one really
Mhm.
common one that I don't answer, I don't end up answering a lot because it's almost an impossible thing to answer. And it boils down to, will I ever find love? A lot of people who are saying, my heart is broken, so and so, and they go on these long tangents of telling me all the ins and outs of what happened, and they've been broken up with, and then now they're convinced that they'll never find love and they're unlovable, or they've been single for a while and that hurts and they're lonely. And how do I find love? How do I recover from a broken heart? And essentially the answer is you just have to wait it out and trust the process and you will be
Mhm.
loved.
Right.
But that's definitely a very common one. And the other one, I think what it really boils down to, and this one is one that I answer in a variety of ways. On surface level, they seem like they're different subjects, but they're always at core. Can I want what I want? Can I
Mm.
trust myself? Can I decide
Mhm.
to actually do what I want rather than what my parents want or my spouse wants or I think society wants or what would be
Yeah.
the the
Expectations.
expectations? And
Dreaded
the answer is
expectations.
always yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always say I'm so grateful that my parents had big expectations for me and they were non-specific.
Yeah.
They were like, you're awesome. You're going to do something great. Figure it out. What is it? Go do it.
Yeah.
That's it. And I tell every parent that the worst thing you can do is to have extremely limited idea of what your child should be or want,
Yeah.
because they will wrestle with whether they're meeting that at every turn, even if you don't know it. You might not even know that you put that on them and they might internalize it, but you got to be so careful about the path that you help them build and letting them find it for themselves. What do you think's the worst advice you've ever given?
That's a great question. Um, mm, you know, I think that back in the days when I was just writing the Dear Sugar column online on the Rumpus, there were a couple of letters that maybe were from people who like were parenting teens or young adults. And at the time that I was writing those, my kids were in the like young and oh my God, mom, we just adore you and everything you do is the best thing in the world phase. And so I was maybe a little more on my high horse than I would be now.
What? Like it's hard?
Like my kids are now 20 and 21 and I have been humbled by the process
Mm.
of raising teenagers and it's a
Mm.
little trickier than maybe I thought it would be. And yeah, I would have been a little bit more like, oh dear heart, I know this is hard.
Yeah.
Let's try. I'd be like,
Yeah.
you just have to talk openly and communicate your
I
feelings.
know.
And I'm like, okay, yeah, yeah, just zip the
Little
mouth shut.
different now.
Yeah. If you haven't parented a teen, maybe just sit in the corner and
Yeah.
and
Right.
and
Call a friend.
yeah, bake
Let me call a friend for this one.
yeah, like deliver some cookies, and yeah, leave it at that.
Yeah. Is there something big you've changed your mind about? Some big moment or opinion or topic that's controversial and you realize looking back, like, wow, that's something I really felt differently about earlier in life?
Gosh, you know, I do think I've always been a very curious person, and I'm I'm obsessed with like evidence-based things. I'm always like, well, what's the science of that, or what are the like, what is this
Yeah.
actually? I guess what I like facts, like I do, and I seek them out. And so if I make an assumption about something, like I will usually investigate it and really research it, and I will change my mind. I can't think of anything where I've really like taken a big shift. I've certainly been
Yeah.
informed, but, like, there are a lot of things I didn't know about that I know about now. But I will say, I have always been it's pretty interesting to me when I think about who I was as a young woman. As an undergraduate at the University of Minnesota, I double majored in creative writing and women's studies. The two descriptors I would use for myself today, writer, feminist, and so
Yeah.
I have really been, very much on course. Like, I've stayed on that track. I will say politically, I'm still an activist, and I go out and hold signs in the street, and that feels good to
Mhm.
me. I think I do feel sadly like a little less idealistic. Like, I'm
Mhm.
like, I'm gonna change the world, and
Mhm.
what I guess the thing I would say that's changed the most is I feel like um, changing the world looks maybe slightly differently than I thought it would look. That to me, I do
Yeah.
feel like I've made an impact, but where have I made the impact? In what arena have I made the biggest impact? I would say through my art and through my writing,
Right.
not through my activism.
Right. In everyday lives, not systems change, which
Yeah.
turns out to be perhaps more unwieldy than we ever could have imagined based on recent revelations.
Yeah.
One thing I will say I've changed my mind about that you made me think of is I'm also very much into facts. And I come from a family of lawyers also. So it's sort of like a prove it or like, let's talk it through
Yeah.
until we get to the logic of it all. And the older I get more woo woo. I'm just a little bit more like, how the hell do we know? Maybe astrology is a thing. Maybe there is an energy share.
Yeah.
Maybe people are psychic. Maybe there are aliens. Maybe like at every turn, I'm like, I don't know. Let's talk about it. Let's dive into it. It could be fun. It could be interesting. So I'm way more woo woo than I used to be. I used to roll my eyes at that, but I think also just women in general, we get older and more feminist and more witchy. They always say
Yeah.
everybody gets more conservative as they get older, except for angry women. We just get more and more
Totally true.
offended by the idea of it all. You mentioned earlier you were a waitress. You were also a youth advocate,
Yeah.
a political organizer, an office temp, an emergency medical technician. You've had a lot of jobs. And I'm wondering what your advice to someone out there who thinks that they're wise or talented or full of art that they need to share, but they're stuck in that temp job or they're stuck behind a diner counter and they're not sure how to get from one to the other. What's your broadest advice to how to finally take that step?
Yeah. That's such a great question. And I would say, first of all, change your mindset from this idea that you're stuck. And I know that feeling because I have had really sometimes shitty jobs or some of those jobs you listed I loved and cared a lot about, but I knew it wasn't like really my true calling, which is writing. And I think that, what I always came back to is I am doing what I need to do to support myself. Now that means both financially, I took those jobs because I had to pay the bills, but also what I was doing is supporting this endeavor that did mean something to me. So if I was waiting tables, but my real work, quote unquote, was writing my first novel, which was the case for many years, make damn sure that I'm doing that real work too. So,
Mhm.
follow through on that commitment to yourself. So you're going to feel a lot better in that job that you're only working to pay the rent. If also you can look back on the week before and say, and did I say I was going to write 6 hours last week? Yes. And did I write 6 hours last week? I did. And that
Mm.
is the way you make your dreams come true, is you make good on your intentions, period. End of story. You don't necessarily write 6 hours brilliantly. You don't write 6 hours that you feel
Mhm.
like are going to win the Pulitzer Prize. You write or you do the thing, fill in the blank, whatever it is that is feeding your soul or making you feel like you are answering the call within you, or maybe it's not even that deep. It's like something else that gives you life. And that's really important to do. And also in retrospect, I mentioned I grew up poor. I've had a job since I was like 13 or 14. As a teenager, I worked at the Dairy Queen in McGregor, Minnesota. I worked as a janitor's assistant at the little podunk school where I went to school. And when I went to college and met all these people who had more economic privilege than me and found out, oh, they'd been going to summer camp and they'd, went to
Yeah.
France and
Private tutor.
and they had so many opportunities. Same with like studying abroad. I couldn't study abroad as a college student. Like they had so many opportunities. And for a long time, I had a chip on my shoulder because I thought they were better educated than me. And now what I know, maybe this is an answer to your question, what I changed my mind about, how lucky I am because guess what? I got an incredible education. I got an
Mhm.
incredible education. You work for Dairy Queen. for 4 summers. And trust me, you're going to learn something about the human condition.
Yeah.
And also soft
Yeah.
serve ice cream. I can make one of those
Yeah.
loop-de-doop things, But
Yeah.
what I
That's
mean,
important.
I mean that in a really sincere way. To think
Yeah.
about these jobs, these jobs that don't feel like they're giving you something, much. They're actually teaching you a lot, and it's about learning the lessons that are offered to you and making something out of them in the end.
I actually think a lot of kids would do really well by having a gap year before they go to college and trying to just get a job in the real world so that they apply themselves at college, understanding what they're going to be entering when they're done, instead of the sort of freedom of just going straight from high school to college and never having to pay the bills and figure it out. I also think, what was the name of your first guest on Mind Over Mountain? Remind me.
Tamara Walcott, powerlifter.
Yeah, Tamara Walcott. She was talking about, you asked her about the motivation to go in and work every day toward her craft. And she said, don't get it twisted. You call it motivation, it's actually dedication, and they're very different.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about the semantics of that, but I think what you just said kind of ties into that, which is you can tell yourself there's a different meaning between I need to be motivated by wanting to do more or win this or earn this versus I need to be dedicated to this thing, regardless of whether it serves me and feeds me, because it's the thing that gets me the other thing I want.
Yeah.
So being dedicated to your job so that you can write afterwards, being dedicated to your work, whatever it is in the moment, so that you can get eventually to the place where you can do another job you care more about. I think reframing it as dedication instead of needing to feel a motivation
Yeah, for sure.
might get you through some shit that I'm not motivated to go to Dairy Queen. I am dedicated to show up every day because I'm going to get something else out of it.
Yeah.
Which
And
I thought that was interesting.
And I think too, I absolutely agree with that. Dedication, intention, that kind of commitment is everything. But also, I think it's so important to remember these are, one step at a time deals. Again, here we go back to wild. Like, how do you walk a long trail? One step at a time. How do you do anything? That when Tamara talked about going to the bar, it's like going every day. And some days you can lift
the bar to lift,
that
not
way,
to drink.
and sometimes the bar to lift. Exactly. And sometimes it's harder than others, but those days accumulate. Same with like any kind of artistic endeavor. If you write one page every day for a year, that's not, on that daily scale, that's not much, one page. But at the end of the year, that's 365 pages. That's a book, So I think that trusting in the power we have on the sort of like at foot speed, if you will, on the micro level, and those things add up. And so, you can live a life where you look back and think, I should have done this, I should have done that. Or you can look back and say, I'm so glad I did these things because look where they got me now.
Yeah. I always think if you're like, what do I want to be in 10 years? Then you got to go, okay, what does that look like in 5 years? Okay, what does that mean I have to do in 3 years? Okay, what does that mean has to happen in the next year? Okay, what can I start tomorrow? Instead of always, in 10 years, I want for this. And what are you doing every day to get to that? And you also just mentioned regrets, which brings me to my last question. One of the advice columns that I've sent a few folks that you wrote was a response to a man who was wondering if he and his wife should have children. And in it, you wrote, quote, you say that you and your partner don't want to make the choice to become parents simply because you're afraid you will regret not having one later. But I encourage you to re-examine that. Not regretting it later is the reason I've done at least 3/4 of the best things in my life. So I'm wondering now, looking back, if you can think of a time that approach failed you, like, oops, probably should have thought about that differently, or if there's a regret that you do have.
It's interesting because that is true. I mean, what I was writing about is that choice to have kids. When I got pregnant with my first child, I wasn't like, I desperately am ready to have a baby take over my life. I was like, oh, geez, I guess it's time. We better do this.
Yeah.
TikTok, and I no regrets. I was thrilled to have my baby. But I would say where my mind went first when you asked that question is, like sort of on paper, you could look at my life and say, well, you probably shouldn't have gotten married like at the insanely young age that you did. I married my first husband. Like, I blush to even say it because I simply cannot believe that I got married a month before my 20th birthday.
Neither can I.
Yeah, it's shocking to me. And yet it's, I loved him. He loved me. We had a really wonderful relationship. In retrospect, we should have just been boyfriend and girlfriend, each other's big, serious first relationships as adults. And we got married instead, which meant we had to get divorced. And, that was painful. And that brought on a lot of turmoil and pain in my life. But, I also hesitate to honestly say it as a regret because obviously, I needed to make those choices at the time. and they taught me something. And,
Yeah.
I think that I love that, Breezy, I love this quote that I heard Breezy Johnson say, I think just recently at the Olympics, you either win or you learn, so even when something quote unquote fails, like you could say that first marriage failed, but, I learned a lot and that has served me.
Yeah. I think that's back to the attitude thing too. If you're able to see how all the things that either went wrong or weren't quite right got you to where you are now and you're grateful for that, then you don't want to change them. To quote another Olympian, Alyssa Liu said, I wouldn't go back and tell my younger self anything. She's going to figure it out and she needs to go through that for me to get here. So
that's right.
Well, it was
wise women with capital W's right there.
Yeah, and she's only 20
I know.
and unmarried, so she's got it all figured out. Cheryl, it was so great to talk to you. I'm so excited to hear more of Mind Over Mountain. I'm so grateful that you're a part of our new iHeart Women's Sports family. And as our producer Alex pointed out, it's not too late for either of us to become the first female president, unfortunately. So if we want to take another big swing before we're gone, we're way too young, apparently, to even think about running for president. But I think I just keep it in the back of our minds.
Since we're both kind of, we've sort of changed, we're sort of reticent about this. Like we could, how about co-presidents? Like
perfect.
Maybe
the first ever co-leadership president.
Well, since America, hates women so much, we can't manage to elect one female president who's way overqualified. Maybe if we present two of us,
yeah, well, because our brains are so small, but if we put two of our brains together, it'd be like a man.
Well, and also technically, we're both underqualified to actually be president. I mean, we're qualified in a lot of other ways, but
yeah, that's actually not a thing anymore. I don't know if you've noticed, but not a thing anymore. Literally.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It might be the winning ticket,
might be the winning
two women
ticket.
on one hand, like the people, categories of people we hate, women, and
yes.
categories of people we love, vastly underqualified for the job.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. Strayed Spain, Spain strayed.
It's a word
we'll
twister.
Have to think about which one.
All the Cheryl
Sprayed.
It's strained.
There we go.
We could run as strained, which is
strained
totally
or
what
spayed or neutered. Yeah.
Spayed.
The power of women. In
I'm in menopause, so I'm like, I'm basically spayed. I'm like
oh my gosh, and I didn't have kids, so between the two of us, we're literally worthless.
We're just like the old witch crones. I call myself a crone. I'm like, once I hit menopause, I was like, call me a crone, capital C.
There we go.
Yeah.
2 capital W's and 1 capital C. Cheryl, thanks so much for coming on.
It's wonderful to talk to you, Sarah. Thank you.